Hi, I'm Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. This 30-minute podcast features a new author interviewed by me every single day, 365 days a year, for about 30 minutes. I am also the publisher for Zibby Books, which publishes 12 books a year in fiction and memoir. Our books are already out now. You can check it out on zibbybooks.com. And we have a magazine called Zibby Mag, where we have lots of wonderful essays and lifestyle features. That's at zibbymag.com. We have classes at zibbyclasses.com. And I recently opened a bookstore in LA called Zibby's Bookshop at 1113 Montana Avenue at 11th Street in Santa Monica. I hope that you are able to enjoy some of our other offerings. But this here podcast is the basis of all of it and started in 2018. And no matter what I do, this is basically my favorite thing. Enjoy. James B. Stewart is the author of Unscripted, The Epic Battle for a Media Empire, and The Redstone Family Legacy. James Stewart is the author of 10 books, including the New York Times bestsellers Deep State, Tangled Webs, and the blockbuster Den of Thieves. Also Disney War, which I read and absolutely loved. He is currently a columnist for the New York Times and a professor at Columbia Journalism School. In 1988, he won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the stock market crash and insider trading. Welcome, James. Thank you so much for coming on Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books to discuss your latest book, Unscripted, The Epic Battle for a Media Empire and the Redstone Family Legacy. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I have to tell you, I have been such a fan of yours for so long, and this is a podcast I'm like giddy excited to be doing. I have read so many of your books. I read Den of Thieves. I read Disney War on my first honeymoon to my ex-husband, and that was like the entire honeymoon. I sat there and read this book. So now Unscripted and all your articles and everything. So anyway, I'm a huge fan. I love the way you write and your amazing reporting and all of it.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell listeners a little about Unscripted?
Well, this is quite this saga. You know, early in my career, I sometimes wondered, like, oh, where's the next story going to come from? And at this point in my life, I realized there's always another story. And sometimes it's I think nothing's going to surprise me. And then everything about this surprised me. But this is the saga. Really, the arc of the story is the billionaire Sumner Redstone is entering his final years. He was at his peak, arguably the most important figure in media and entertainment, with an empire that controlled, the CBS network, Paramount movie studio, the Viacom cable channels, Nickelodeon, MTV, Comedy Central. And he was increasingly estranged from his family, especially his daughter, Shari. And the story really is she is drawn back into both the family business and her father's life by a bizarre set of circumstances. And really she confronts, one obstacle, one hurdle after another towards restoring her relationship with her father and regaining family control of this multi-billion-dollar empire. So, a lot of people have compared this to a real-life Succession, and I get that. In some ways, I think it's stranger than Succession, but ultimately, I think it's a family drama, and particularly about a very rich and powerful father and a daughter. And that fascinated me, I think, because I think especially in nonfiction, you don't see that many depictions of that relationship. Fathers and sons, mothers, daughters, much more common. But this is the dynamic that really drives the plot here.
So interesting. Did you read the new Jim Patterson book with Mike Lupica, The House of Wolves or something like that? The House of what's it called? Something with wolves.
Well,
anyway.
No, I haven't read it, but I should read it. And I will admit to you something that I have not said in any public forum, but I guess I'd started writing, maybe I just started writing this book. Anyway, I was on vacation. We rented a house in the Virgin Islands, and they had a bookshelf there of books people had left, and there was a James Patterson novel there, and I've never read one. And I thought, well, wait a minute, this guy has sold how many millions? I couldn't even count. So I thought, don't be an elitist here. I'll just take a look at this. So I started reading this, and I'm telling you, it's like you on your honeymoon or whatever. We'd be at the beach. I was saying, can we get back? Can we go home? Can we go home a little early? Because I've got to stop. I've got to keep reading this book. And I was obsessed with it. I loved it. So after that, I was, scouted around online, and I saw that James Patterson gives these courses in writing. And he charges some huge amount of money, and I wasn't going to sign up for that. But then I saw some of his former pupils had distilled a lot of what he wrote. And so I eagerly read all of that. And honestly, I did follow some of the suggestions here, including to write shorter chapters. And I'd always written these like 10,000 word chapters before. And like suddenly I thought, that's an interesting idea. I mean, his chapters are 3 pages or 4 pages. Now, I didn't go that far, but I definitely chopped it down. And it's really interesting because you have to craft that. You've got to be thinking, okay, the end of a thought, the end of a scene, and then how do you get people going? But it really sped up the momentum, I think. Anyway, but people have been complimenting, the book and how readable it is. And again, I've never said this before, but I have to give some credit to James Patterson.
That is so funny. Oh my gosh. I love it. I love that you didn't pay for the class and you're like getting the Cliff's Notes of the classes.
Yes,
I mean, that's like,
I'm sorry if James Patterson's listening to this.
Oh my gosh.
I hope he doesn't miss that income, but I got it secondhand.
Oh my gosh. Well, his latest book is about, and I just had him on the podcast for this, which is why I'm bringing it up. I don't usually just talk about other people's books, but it featured like the daughter of a very powerful man who has to then take on the company. And I don't know, I think you'll find it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, some real similarities there. I'll have to take a look at that.
In fact, the two of you should really go on the road. You should do like an event together. I'll moderate. I'll be the moderator if you want. Anyway, but it is interesting, and especially sort of this withholding of parental love, or like what it does to a child to not have the consistency of love, and how do you handle that, and how does that affect your personality, and therefore, of course, your leadership style, but really everything that you do in life, right? And it's
absolutely, and that it's a theme that runs throughout the book, and Sumner Redstone, the billionaire mogul, has many, I don't know quite how to put this in a polite way, but he's not exactly a role model, to put it mildly. He himself said, I'm going to go to hell anyway, so I might as well do whatever I want, or something, something to that effect. But clearly throughout the story, his daughter, Shari, is still yearning for his approval and his love. And there's, I think, an incredibly poignant scene, right almost at the very end where, Sumner has finally died and his daughter reaches out to his closest confidant and says, well, do you think he really loved me? And it just, it gets me even now, because I was thinking after all that she did for him, the fights that she went through, she doesn't have the peace of mind of even knowing that, which is probably the one thing that she really wanted. I think that's a lesson, for anybody in a family. To some extent, I know we all feel that about our parents.
It's true. I feel like she might have benefited from maybe a little bit of a better therapist or something, because after a while, you have to make peace with that. And if you're going to be a successful person, right? Emotionally, right. I don't know.
Well, her brother just abandoned the family completely. He sold out his interest. He took his $250 million and he went to a ranch in Colorado, never to be heard from again. I don't know that that's the answer either. That's like just, running away from the thing. And, I don't know what kind of peace of mind he has, but I don't know that that's, the best way to deal with it either.
True. Well, you describe in the book some of the ways in which he is not like the most role model of a guy.
To put it mildly.
Can you tell the story here about the fire? Because I hadn't known that until I read this book. And
oh yeah, well, I think this was a very formative episode as well. It might have been, but he was from the Boston area, but he was staying at the Copley Plaza Hotel one night, which is a kind of famous old hotel on Copley Square in Boston, and a fire broke out on the floor, and he had to escape from the room, and he went out the window and tried to climb out of there. And he was hanging from the window ledge. Eventually, he was hanging by only one hand because the flames were, lapping out of the window, and they seriously burned his hand. Somehow, he managed to hang on until the rescuers got there and he escaped. But his hand was he was in the hospital for serious surgery, and his hand was disfigured for the rest of his life. But he seemed to take away from that episode the sense that he was invincible, that the sheer willpower had saved his life. And that willpower went on to, conquer the media world. And, he outbid, one suitor after another to acquire all these properties. And that survival instinct seemed to shape much of the rest of his life. I mean, he went around later in life saying, "Oh, I'm never going to die." And he cannot literally believe that, but he certainly said it on many occasions. And I think that you can trace a lot of that to that episode. Now, one thing that was not disclosed at the time was that he had a mistress in the room with him, and she got out first. And to his credit, he let her go. She was relatively unscathed. But it took 20 years for that to emerge. And it was just the beginning. I mean, his philandering was notorious and only got worse as he got older.
But you were so funny too, because you described how he dressed and the size of his lapels or his tie or the shirt, and you're like, he's so unlikely to be this, Lothario, the way that he looks and dresses.
I know. Well, there was one detail there that he came to a meeting. I think it was a closing or something in New York, with all these high-powered investment bankers.
Oh, with Sam's Club or something? No, what did you say? TJ Maxx? Yeah, you're not a fan.
Well, he was always saying his favorite movie was The Godfather, and I agree it's an excellent movie, but I don't know that I would want to dress like one of those characters, and with the implications that involve. Yeah. But then that's just me. So.
I feel like my life keeps circling around The Godfather. Did you watch that show about Bob Evans?
Oh my God, Bob Evans! No, but Bob Evans was Sumner's so-called best friend, and
yes.
Seems to have been a bad influence. But I sometimes wonder if it was the other way around. There's a scene in the book where Bob Evans sits down at one of his birthday parties to one of the younger women who he was sort of dating, and he was living with these two mistresses in the mansion. And Bob Evans says, "You've got to save him from these women." And I was thinking, oh my God, that's rich coming from Bob Evans, given his notorious philandering.
You have to watch it when you have a sec. It's the best show.
So I've got to read the James Patterson book. I've got to watch the Bob Evans show.
You do.
You're going to keep me busy for a while.
I am. Well, I mean, I guess I should ask, when you're not doing what I'm telling you to do and you're not writing books like this, what do you do with your, are you working nonstop? I know we'll come back to the book, but in your spare time, what do you normally like to read and write and do? And
I have a lot of interests. I don't know where to start. I mean, yes, I do. The weekends, I was writing this book, with my co-author during the pandemic, which was the weekends just blurred. So, I probably did work virtually every weekend during that period, but not all the time. And so I have a number of hobbies. I'm a very avid pianist. I play classical music, and, if life is sort of normal, which it's not at the moment, I practice every day. I try to practice an hour every day. And of course I don't get to do it every day, but maybe I do 5 out of 7. So, and I play a lot of chamber music. And so that's one very nice hobby. And I also like gardening, and I have a garden both here in the city, small one in the backyard. And then we have a house upstate New York where I have a garden that's way too big. As I realize now, and I've had to get a little help there, but so I really enjoy all that. And I read a lot, and I teach at Columbia as well, and I encourage my students to read both fiction and nonfiction. And again, writing this to me there was such rich raw material, and it really gave me an opportunity to write what I would call a nonfiction novel. It has all the elements of fiction, even though all the facts are verified and accurate. I certainly hope. But there's enough material there that you can evoke these broader themes, like I mentioned, the generational issues, the family drama, the corrupting influence of great wealth, or at least the opportunity to get it. All of that sort of emerges without me having to, take a baseball bat and hit the reader over the head. So I do read fiction, I read nonfiction, and I'm busy, but and I like to cook. I like to cook too. I find that very soothing, especially after writing, all day. And a weird thing about the pandemic is, you think, well, writing is kind of a solitary enterprise anyway. You've got to hole up somewhere and churn this out. But in normal times, the day ends, and you can go out, you can go to dinner, you can see your friends, you can let off steam, you can say, oh, you won't believe what I found out today. Something like that. I think there's a reason why, I live in the West Village of Manhattan, and there are all these bars around that where, famous writers used to go hang out, probably drink too much. But you do sort of need that. And then with the pandemic, that was gone. But I found that at the end of the day, a little cooking is very therapeutic. You have to, at least I have to concentrate. I'm not one of those people who can like cook and talk at the same time. I like to concentrate. And it really kind of, I found, was very soothing and a nice change of pace. So I don't do anything fancy, but I do like it. I like the shopping too.
Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like my husband also used to love to cook until the pandemic, when he cooked for the 4 kids and me the entire time. And he's like, I never want to do this again.
Yeah, no, I don't have to do it 3 meals a day. So I know I can't imagine what my mother was doing all those years. But
so I know you started your career as a lawyer and
yes.
morphed into this whole other piece of your career afterwards. Did you want to be a writer when you were a lawyer? And by the way, I feel like most lawyers want to be writers. I feel like we should take a poll, and like the next great place to find fiction, we should just poach all the law firms, because I bet there are a lot of books lurking there.
Yeah, well, of course, there's John Grisham, and I think, well, I was in litigation, and I don't think I certainly didn't go to law school. It spent 3 years with a lot of work and a lot of tuition, knowing that I was going to go into what would be otherwise considered a relatively low-paying, alternative practicing law. But I did, by the time I was working in a big law firm, I was giving more thought. I've written about this at some length. I think it was one of the most important lessons I learned in life. I was working at a big law firm in New York, Cravath, Swin and Moore, very competitive. And I saw the people who thrived there and did the best were the people who absolutely loved what they were doing. They had such a competitive advantage. And even though I enjoyed it and I did like getting a paycheck, I realized I didn't love it nearly as much as they did. And ultimately, I don't think that you can compete. So I thought, well, what would I love as much as they do? And I'd been editor of my college newspaper, and I was like, all the time I was like dreaming up story ideas that if I was a journalist, I might write. And so I realized, it seems like a radical change, but I'm going to make the leap into journalism because I think that's something that I would really love to do. And you don't love any job every minute of every day. That's completely unrealistic. But I've really never looked back from that. I really do. I do love what I do for the most part. And that is, a good part of your life is spent working. So if you can enjoy that, what an advantage. So I really feel very lucky that I learned that lesson working at Cravath and then went on and put it into practice. And, here I am all these decades later.
Oh my gosh. I learned the same lesson. I went to business school. I thought I wanted to be in marketing. And then I went to business school and met people who loved marketing so much. And I was like, oh yeah, no, I don't want to do it like you do. Like you should take those jobs then.
Right.
But it's so true. I mean, there are people who love everything. You should, finding passion is wonderful. So what topics are you digging into these days, writing about, thinking about?
Well, I did a really big piece for the Times on this sort of AT&T management of the Warner assets. And I'm not per se a media or entertainment person, but I guess partly because I was working on this book, which was, set in the world of Hollywood and media and entertainment. I developed some sources. And anyway, that story is about sort of the colossal mismanagement, if you want to call that, of these incredibly valuable and historic media assets by phone company executives. So it's kind of again it's more about a culture clash than it is any technical business thing per se. So that was a big story that I was working on, and then that led right into the succession drama at Disney. And a lot of people, as I said, have compared Unscripted to the TV series Succession, and I can see why. But then there are these other Succession, issues arising all over the place. So that was kind of an interesting drama that I wrote some about. I haven't started on another book project. I can never get my head clear. It's going to take me a little while before I get Unscripted out of. I'm not talking about it so much, and have put that sort of behind me. Of course, I'd like to do another story, and I do have the germ of a few ideas. But I look back sort of on my career, and not that I planned it, but I do seem drawn to stories of people who seem to have everything, but yet it's not enough, and then they misbehave and they do the kind of bad things that they know they shouldn't do, and it gets into trouble. And I think they're the archetype, those stories go way back. I mean, Shakespeare's obvious place to start, but those themes have, reappeared in literature for centuries. And I think it's because at their core, they're really about fundamental issues about human nature and how we as people, process information and wealth and relationships and then act on those drive and ambition. And, because it's all about people, it's endlessly fascinating to me. So I seem to be drawn to those kinds of stories.
I wonder if over time we'll see similar patterns emerge from more and more women in power, because, we're just the generations of women who are leading all the companies is just.
Well, yeah. I mean, and this is the first book. And Shari Redstone, she's the protagonist of the story.
Right.
She's drawn in. She's drawn into this fray initially kind of against her will. She grows, she changes, she matures, she ends up, if you want to call it that, victorious at the end. And this is the first this is my 11th book. And this is the first one where I've had a significant protagonist who's a woman. And I think that is a sign of the times, although there's still a long way to go. And by the way, certainly one of the themes of this book is the, to me, astonishing misogyny and sexism that permeated the upper ranks of the boards and management in these companies. I think I only delved into this particular company, but I have no reason to believe this is an isolated example. But to see it laid out, people don't ever want to admit this, but you see it in their emails, their texts, all the documents we got. Somebody told me that after reading this book, no CEO is ever going to write a text again. Maybe that'll be the case. And, partly because there were so many lawsuits about all this. Again, an advantage of being a lawyer, lawsuits generate, a trove of valuable information when you can get access to it. And we did get even things that were supposed to be kept secret. A lot of people did hand over to us. So we got the raw material. We could demonstrate that.
Wow. And how did you like collaborating on this book?
It was great. I've never had a co-author. Rachel and I don't think we knew each other at all. I mean, I guess I'd seen her in the newsroom, but when she bumped into me one day and we realized we were working on parallel tracks on the kind of the same story, which was about the ouster of Les Moonves from CBS. And then we went from there. But she had this incredibly valuable source who we still can't identify at this point, but who provided an amazing trove of information. And so that was, fundamental to getting the book deal and doing the book. And then I also had some sources funneling additional information. We ended up having, maybe a half dozen of sources we can't name, but nevertheless, because I think motivated, because they didn't want this story swept under the rug, they contributed, really valuable information. So we put it all together. And I was very happy that in talking to some of them since then, they said, "Oh, I can't believe, I gave you all this, but then you got all this other material." And it is true in reporting that with every additional fact tends to lead to more. The more you know, the more you can find out. And that proved to be the case here.
My big takeaway is that people actually listen to the tip line of the newspaper.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's where the source came from. Just, kind of out of the blue. And yes, those get taken very seriously, even though honestly 99% of them don't go anywhere. But the one that does, boom. Also that people have said that like the fact that I ran into Rachel and we went down this path together is a case for in-office work, because that would
very
never happen if we were just sitting in our bedrooms or whatever, tapping away.
Very true. Yes. Well, you never know what happens around the water cooler or walking by each other.
Yeah, that's true.
I know you've mentioned this, but I was going to ask you what advice you have for aspiring authors, but maybe I should ask what other advice you got from James Patterson for aspiring authors.
No, I do have some advice. I mean, I teach at Columbia, which I really enjoy. And one of the things I stress to my students is that it's not what you know that's so interesting, it's what you don't know. And that people aren't used to thinking that way. You have to kind of train your brain over a period of time. I was an editor at the Wall Street Journal for a number of years, and I was a page one editor. So we had to come up with 15 front page stories a week, 5 days a week. And that was an excellent exercise because I was constantly, of course, many of the reporters had their own ideas, but we were also sending out ideas for stories. And so to me, what's interesting is what questions you have that you might be able to answer. What don't we know? What has happened that seems inexplicable? That's what I think turns into good stories. Too many of not so much my students, but people, they think, there's an old saying of writers, like, write what you know. My variation on that would be figure out what you don't know but want to know, find out, and then write it. I mean, over the years, I've had reporters or writers come to me and say, "Oh, I have writer's block. I can't write. I've been in a room all 8 hours and I'm throwing everything out." I don't really believe in writer's block. It's invariably that they have nothing to say because they have not gone out and gotten the information yet. And almost always I would say, you're not ready to write. Go do more reporting. So what don't you know? What are the questions? How can you find out? Go out and do that work. And then you'll be able to write it. An interesting thing that happened in this book, which made a great impression on me, because I'm always telling my students, don't have any preconceived ideas about what a story is. You might think you know what it is, which is fine, but be open to facts that take you in another direction. So I started writing this, and we kind of thought, oh, it's the Me Too movement, it's the corporate boardroom. And then we got in touch with this guy, George Pilgrim, who was the boyfriend of one of Sumner's mistresses. And I figured at most he'd be a minor character in all of this. So Rachel went out to interview him, and he's an unbelievably interesting character. And he was telling us everything, and he saved emails and texts, and he turned everything over. He was a fantastic source, even though he was also an ex-convict. So I was thinking to myself, this is incredible, but he's taking over the story. I was kind of annoyed. So this is not the book that we set out to write. And what's going on here? But one morning I woke up and I had this flash of insight, and I said, let him take over the story. He is the story. He is a key part of the story. We threw everything out and started all over again. He's in the opening scene. And it was incredible how the whole story just fell into place.
Wow. All thanks to George Pilgrim, his Facebook posts and all of that. We have to be careful now about our texts and Facebook posts and everything else that comes out of our fingertips. You never know what's going to happen. Anyway, right. Well, James, thank you so much. It's been really fun talking to you. I love this idea of you cooking and gardening and playing the piano. It's so relaxing. I feel relaxed just even talking to you about it. It sounds so nice.
I should go practice the piano right now.
You should. You go for that. Anyway, thank you so much for your time, and congratulations.
Thanks. This is really fun.
Unscripted.
I really enjoyed it.
Good. Me too.
Bye.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens and at Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. Also sign up for my newsletter at zibbyowens.com and sign up for my virtual book club and meet lots of authors on Zoom every other week. Thanks so much to Steve and Ryan at Texture Sound for the sound editing. And thank you to Morning Moon Productions for providing this fantastic intro and outro music.